All right, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is just a little demo, sort of a warm-up, sort of get ourselves reacquainted with making HTML files, CSS files, linking them up together, and applying some basic styles. So what we're looking at is a landing page that I'd like everybody to create for their shell account. You don't have to do this exact design. You can do whatever design works for you. This is the one I've put together, and we're just going to go ahead and make this from the beginning. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder on my desktop, and just going to give it a name of shell account. And I recommend, using all lowercase for your folder names and for all your file names, no spaces, right? If you want to separate words, you can use a hyphen or an underline. Another convention is to do what's called camel case. So camel case would be for each second word you capitalize the next word, right? So instead of hyphen A, it would be shift A. I find it easier to read and understand with a hyphen. The reason is that when we're doing path names, and all of our files are going to be linked together, so we have to keep track of the path, what folder it's in, then what the name of the file is, where we link to it. If there are spaces, you can run into trouble, right? So, and again, cap in lowercase. If some are capped and some are lowercase, then you have to remember, did I make it a capital? Did I not make it a capital? So setting some conventions to begin with and then just not having to think about it anymore can make this a lot easier. So my own conventions, lowercase and hyphens. All right, so I have my folder created, and I'm going to go ahead and open that folder in VS Code. Again, I keep my icons down here in the footer. You may have a folder that you open up the applications folder and drag it on. You can open up, so let's just do that, right? So if we do VS Code, and we say new window, then we can take the shell account folder, just drag it in, and here we are, right? That's our shell account folder. So first thing we need to do, if you remember from Design for the Web 1, the root folder in any web server is going to be the index files. Let's go ahead and create one. Index.html. VS Code uses a little code helper called emit. There'll be a link to that in the class blog as early in the resources section about some tips for emit. But one of the things is you can type, let's type it right, an exclamation point, right? And you'll see it gives a little drop down. And you'll see for the exclamation point, it says emit, E-M-M-E-T, abbreviation, right? It's slightly highlighted. You can see it's a little darker on my screen, right, than the 3 exclamation points. And if I go ahead and hit the return key, it automatically generates the basic structure for an HTML file, right? It gives us our doc type, HTML set to language English, and then all HTML files, right, have this structure: HTML, head, and body. Now the head is information about the file, right? So it's the character set, UTF-8. It's how all the letters and numbers are encoded, so it can tell what characters should be shown based on the letter and the number that we type. This meta tag, viewport, with device, blah, blah. This is for responsive design, and this is because different screens have a different pixel count, right? High density screens for your phone may be very small, right? They may be 6 inches wide or 4 inches wide, but they may have 1,800 or 2,200 pixels in them, right? If we do 20 pixel type on a screen with that many pixels, it will be almost impossible to see. So what the device manufacturers do is they calculate what a pixel should look like under normal viewing conditions based on the device that you're on, right? So it translates 24 pixels to something that approximates 24 pixels on a phone, as well as on a desktop, as well as on a laptop, as on a tablet. So basically it helps keep the sizes relative and looking reasonably the same. Title, right? The title is up here, right? It says document up here in the top tab, so anything we type in here will show up there. And then we have our body. The body is where we're going to put all of our HTML. All right. Once you've created a file, you'll see this white dot. That indicates that a change has happened on the file and we need to save it. So I'm just going to go ahead and command save. All right. Now it turns to an X. X means it'll just close the file and we'll see our file is created here. Okay. All right. So we're going to use CSS on this project. So I'm going to go ahead and make a folder called CSS. And then I'm just going to select that folder. I'm going to create a new file called style.css. And there's our style sheet. Right? So we don't have any styles yet. We'll get to all of that. Let's go back to our index file. So one of the main ways, and the primary way we'll use style sheets in this class, will be what's known as a linked style sheet. Okay, so in the head, right after the title, I'm going to try and link, right? And you'll see I have link.css. I'm going to click that one. And there we go, right? And it's already loaded style.css, but this is not actually going to work for us, right? It's calling to style, but again, this is a link, a relative link. So what it's looking for is it's looking for a style sheet in the root, right? So at the same level as index.html, but ours is not at the same level. It's actually in a directory. So we're going to have to type CSS /. And you'll see that when we do that, all right, we get this little highlight, and this is telling us that it's looked in the folder, and in the folder it's found style.css. Let's just make this a little clearer. Okay. All right. So the Emmet abbreviation just gives you a default of style.css. We have to make sure that we link it appropriately the way our folder structure is built, right? Okay, the white dot means we have to save again. All right, so now we're all set there. All right, so what do we got to make here? I'm just going to do a quick H1 tag. And again, the same thing, you type H1, the Emmet abbreviation. If we hit the return key, will give us our H1. And this is, I'm going to call this test header. Okay, I'm going to save that. And really what I want to do is I just want to make sure that my style sheet is linked up correctly. All right, so I'm going to make a CSS rule. All right, so there's our basic structure. We type the element selector that we're interested in, and then our curly brackets. And I'm just going to go ahead and go with a color after the attribute, right? We'll do a colon and a space, and what do we got? A, B. Blue violet looks offensive. All right, and then we end our rule with a semicolon, right? And this is the main structure. Our selector, our curly brackets, the attribute we're targeting ends with a colon, right? And then, or this is the property that we're targeting, and then this is the attribute that it is, whatever the value is going to be, right? Rolling over, we can sort of see, we can pick our own colors. Blue violet is a named CSS color. We'll talk about that at a later point, but we can use hex values. We can also use RGB. Again, white dot. Go ahead and save that. Check and where is open with live server, and I'm going to hit that. And there it is, right? There's our index file. It's purple. Everything is linked up properly. So going back to VS Code. Okay, so our basic is in place. Now you'll notice that in order to see the file, what is it? Option, no, not that. Yeah, okay. So I work with a 2-button mouse, which means that I can use the right mouse to open up the context menu, right? If you just have a single button mouse, if you hold the control key and click the mouse, you'll get this fly out menu. And I'm working with something called Live Server. Now you probably don't have that available yet. I'm going to show you how to get that active. But what Live Server does is it automatically will run a web server so that you can check and have your HTML working while you're working on your code. And I'm just going to go ahead, type a little more. You'll see the white dot if I save it. And you'll see that the text I typed has shown up right here, right? So once this is running, it will let you make whatever changes you want to your HTML and CSS file, and on saving them, it'll update the browser to show you what you're doing, right? So super, super handy. Okay, so how do we get Live Server running? Over here on the left of VS Code, right, you may not have all the icons I have, but you will have this one, these little boxes, right? And these are the extensions. So you go ahead and click on that. Now, I have a bunch of these installed. What you want to do is you just want to type right here, Live Server. Okay? And this is the one you'll be looking for. And mine is installed, but yours should have this green box that says, or it may not be green, but it should say install, right? Don't install SQL Server. But rather than this gear, it'll say install. Go ahead and install it. Okay. And you may have to restart your VS Code. Maybe I should, hopefully it'll just start running. Okay. All right. So now, once that's installed, we can go back, we click on our file icons, back to our files. Now, holding down the control key and open up the file, you should see the open with Live Server control. Okay. If you don't see it, again, restart your VS Code, and that should show up. Okay. Once you have that, go ahead and click on that and see if you can get your browser to display your HTML file. Okay. All right. Okay, all very nice. So we've got our basics in place, right? We've made an HTML file, made a directory, made our CSS file, we've linked it. Now we have access, right? So okay, we can get rid of this. So let's go back. Take a look at our design here, right? So I'm using a logo. So I have a SVG image, and I've just got some text, right? And a little list. Then I have this icon, a little hover on it, right? And I've got some hovers on these. So, okay, so I'm gonna open up this folder, and I can go ahead and make a new folder in here, and I can call it IMG, right? This is where I'm gonna put my image. And let's just, I'm going to drag over my logo, right? You may have a logo, you don't need to have a logo, you can don't really need to have anything, but just wanted to show adding an image, right? And I'm using an SVG image, right? If you remember types of images that'll work on the internet, SVGs are vector images, so these are essentially special types of Illustrator files. They're all vector. They will always be sharp and smooth. They compress really small. Best for line art, flat color kind of stuff. Icons, logos, that types of things are really there. They're used primarily, but they can be used for all kinds of things. The other ones that we'll use regularly are ping files, .png, GIF files, .gif, and JPEG files, .jpeg. And you'll notice no spaces, and in order to indicate what kind of file is, we use the dot and then the file extension naming convention, right? So for SVGs, they will all be named nameofile.svg. All right, so we got that in place. Back to our, right, and here it is, it's showed up. And you'll see again, right, the SVG is a vector file, it's a mathematical construction, so it actually is code. And we could, right, embed this code in our HTML file and it would show the element, right? And you may see this in other code examples that you find online. All right, so, but for our purposes, we're gonna work with it just as a linked file, just like any old image. So let's go ahead. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a nav. Okay. Now nav, this tag, right, is a semantic tag. Right? You may be familiar with the tag we're going to use next, which is a div. Right? And a div just defines, it's just a wrapper. Right? It doesn't really have any special meaning, but it's something we use to put around other tags and other sections of the website. Nav is the same type of thing, except that calling it nav indicates to the browser and to web crawlers that the information inside of this is a navigational element, right? And then that will have impacts on search engine optimization and screen readers and other automatic processing tools that are part of the browser, right? We could have called it div and then just, put the nav element in there. That's completely acceptable, but this one's a semantic version, so we're using the key parent nav. Okay. All right. And then in here, we're going to add a paragraph. And we're also then going to add an image, and our source is going to be, right, first we're going to go to our folder, and you'll see that as soon as we put the /, right, / is a convention for going into a folder, right? So what we're telling the HTML right now is find the IMG folder, go inside of it, and as soon as we do that, again, it looks inside and it finds any of the files that we could include. So we're going to go ahead and click on logo, and then we're going to give an alt, the alt tag. And the alt tag is important. Whenever you use an image, you must use an alt tag, and that's a verbal description of whatever you're showing in the image. Okay. All right, so if we go ahead, oops, we scroll down a little and we open with live server. And there it is, right? There's our image, it's being displayed, everything is working. It's a little on the large size, but that's okay, right? If we were to change the size, it scales, right? But it always looks sharp, it doesn't matter how big it gets, right? Stays smooth and beautiful, right? Unlike a raster image, like a JPEG file, this might get chewy. The bigger it gets, the resolution. And the file size stays small. Okay. All right. So there we have, and that's our file we're working with. Okay. And then next, right, if I take a look back at our diagram, and we've got this little element, and I'm gonna skip that for now. That's sort of a longer discussion, so we're just going to leave that out. We'll just go with our logo right now. Okay, so back to our HTML. So there it is. We have our nav element, right, with a div and with just an icon in it. So now we're going to go back to, we're going to start styling up this page a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is I want to try and get this logo sized a little more, under a little more control. So I'm going to add a class, right? And if you remember what a class does, it gives us something that we can grab onto with our CSS, and it's a standard item to be used as for our selectors, but it's intended to be used in multiple places. So wherever we would want the CSS rule that we're going to come up with to be applied, we would add the class to that element, and then that rule would be applied. And we can have this in multiple places in our file, right? These are different than IDs. IDs are just used once, but work the same way. I'm not going to use an ID in this demo, but just a reminder. All right, so I'm just going to give this a class of logo. All right, nothing's going to happen. I'm going to go back to my style sheet and logo. So classes always start with a period, right, and then the name of our class. We've got our wrapper, okay, and I'm gonna do a special. I want to with the class of logo, I want to grab any image that I put the class of logo on. All right, so I'll add that. Okay, and now I'm going to define the width. And let's say, oh, I don't know, 100 pixels. And I want to add a little tab here. And there we go, right? We can see it's gotten smaller. That's a little too small, so let's go 200, and we'll save that. And 160, I guess. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay. And it's a little tight, so we're just going to add a little padding, and we're going to do padding on the top and give that, I don't know, 20 pixels. Too much. Okay, that looks good. All right. So our next item is we want to sort of start to deal with our nav itself, right? And sort of start to define, give that some definition. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create that line, right? And I'm going to do border bottom, right? And if you remember the border, we have to set a number of parameters. So I want it to be 1 pixel. I want it to be solid because I want a solid line. And then I want the color to be C4, C4, C4. Okay, we'll save that. All right. Okay, so we've drawn a line, right? But it doesn't quite go to the edge, right? If you remember, all of our HTML elements, or all of our browsers, have a vendor style sheet, meaning that this is Chrome I'm looking in. So Chrome has a style sheet embedded in it that has some basics, so that any HTML file will kind of look halfway reasonable, right? So this extra border, or this extra margin running around out here, is part of the overall style sheet for the browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something known as the universal selector, which is the Shift 8 or the star character. And I'm going to take my margin and set every element to 0. All right, and when I do that, you'll see what happens. Right now, all the extra border space that was around the edge is no longer applied, right? And my logo is touching my line, right? The border bottom of my nav element is touching, and we're all in place. So now we need to go back and say, oh, well, you know, we should probably now maybe add a little more space, and then we're going to do some padding on the bottom. Give that 20 pixels. Right. That looks pretty good. Okay. And our line is still fine, our nav is still fine. Okay. To head back to our design, right? We'll see. My logo is a little smaller. Maybe I'll tweak that. Let's go. What is it? 160. Let's try. Yeah, it's too small. How about 140? Uh-oh. That will be really big. There we go. Right. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay. But we have it, right? So it's actually kind of centered somehow. Now, our nav is a block level element, right? Which means as a block element extends the full width of the viewport unless, right, we give it some width designation, right? That we, just like we do with the logo, right? If you remember, if I turn the logo width off, it expands to the full width of the available viewport. But if I set a width, then it'll shrink it down, right? It'll only go 140 pixels wide. So it's the same concept as working with the nav. The nav right now is going to its full width. And based on the design, I want to keep that, right? I want that line to always stay there, but I want the logo, right, to have this, and you'll see over here, the same size. So I'm going to need to set a width on something, right? It's not going to be on the nav. So let's go see what else we got. It's like, oh, so we have this div element inside the nav, right? The nav is there for semantic purposes. So I'm going to add a class of wrapper to this div element. Right, I'm just going to copy that. And now I want to set a maximum, a max width of 1200 pixels. Okay. Right. Okay, so I've got the max width, right? I don't know how big this is, but presumably, right, my element in there isn't going to get any bigger than 1200 pixels. Could get smaller, right? That's what the max on the width property does. Right? If we set it as width, it would be a fixed width, but if we say max width, it will allow it to be smaller, then it'll get larger until it hits 1200 and then it'll stop. And then I want to center this, right? And now that I have a width on it, I have enough information that I can use the margin property. And I wanted 0, top and bottom, and auto left and right. So let's go ahead. And you'll see that now it's kicked over, right? And you'll see, right, that it has some space, right? When it gets too small, right, because of the maxed width, it'll end up punched to the left, right? And we can add a little padding left of 10 pixels, let's say. All right, now I'll move it over, right, so that now we'll keep a little space on it. We'll need to remember that padding in other places, right? So on that wrapper class, so it won't let it get and ever touch the edge. But our line, right, is our border of our nav element, will touch all the way. Okay. All right, great. So far, so good. We've got our logo in. We've got our little nav line created. And now we're going to move on to, right, our list. Right? We've just got a heading and a list item. Okay. So, all right, back to our index file. All right, so we're going to go ahead all right, I'm just going to use the div. And I'm going to use a trick in Emmet that you may try or not. Emmet uses its own sort of shorthand language and then will generate tags for you. So if I want to make a div with a class on it, right, and I'm going to reuse my wrapper class, right, because I want all my stuff to align. So I'm going to use wrapper, right, with a period between the div and the word wrapper, and now when I hit a return, I get div class with a class of wrapper. You can type it yourself, no problem, not a big deal. Again, there's the more you write HTML, the more Emmet can be useful in helping to start to generate your tags when you're just getting back into it. No problem to write them and then add it manually. Okay. Now, my plan is like I'm going to have a bunch of these little sections here, right, to kill a mockingbird. And so I've got my wrapper, all right, I'm going to make another div, and I'm going to give this a class of project. Okay, all right, so I've given the div class a wrapper the same as I've used here, so now I'm pretty sure that my stuff will show up inside, moved over, max width, right? So it'll all sort of stay at the same size. All right, so now the next item that we're going to need to make, and I'm just going to go with an H2. Inside the H2, okay. And there it is. All right, so it's lined up right. Now it's not placed right. It tries to still need to put some style on it, but my text is there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off my my little listing here. I'm going to use an unordered list, UL, right? And then for each item inside the UL, I'll use an LI for a list item. And version 1, and I can go ahead and just copy that. Okay. And I want to use an href. Okay. And I haven't figured out where I'm going to link to, but I know it's going to be a link, so I have my link now in place, right? Nothing fancy. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that, put that there. And you know what? I might as well just place all of them so that they're all linked. All right, and if I save that, you'll see, all right? There's my list. And so maybe I'll call it yeah, I like that better. There we go. Okay, so now we've got our stuff in place, and really all we need to do now is add a little bit of style to get our elements a little bit more together. Okay, so okay. So our first class, all right, we're going to deal with project. That class, and then we're going to look for the H2, any of the H2 inside, because we're going to have multiples of these projects. So each time we can use the H2. And our first thing is we're going to deal with our font size. And oh, I don't know, let's do 16 pixels. Mm. 24. Oh, it's a little bit better, right? Yeah, 24. How about? Okay. We're going to some margin. And we're going to say 20 pixels. Let's see how we do. That looks pretty good. Okay. So we spaced it down. And, you know, I'm not really loving this typeface. I think, but I don't want to have to set the typeface on every class, right? So I'm going to head back up here, and I'm going to select the body tag. And I'm going to choose font family. I'm going to go with, do I need these? I'm going to do Helvetica. Arial. Sans serif. Okay. Now, what you're right when you do the font family, what these three together are known as a font stack. Right. So what's going to happen is it's going to look and see if Helvetica is available, and if it is, show that. If that's not available, it'll look for Arial, and if that's available, it'll show that. And if it can't find either of those, it'll just find any sans serif that it can find and display the fonts in that. And that'll apply to all the type that we use on the page. Okay, so we've got that in place. All right, I think that looks fine for now. All right, now we're going to move on to our unordered list. We're going to use the same structure, right? And so for all our, if we're looking for our line height. Oh, and I don't, let's say, we got some room here, so we can make this a bit, right? And that's giving us our space between, right? So if I said 34, right, maybe that's too much. If I go to 16, much too tight. So we'll stick with 24. Okay. And I don't want this underlined, right, on any of this. So I'm going to target the LIs, and I'm going to deal with the text decoration. Right. Let's say none. Okay. Oh, forgot something. I got to target the link. There we go. Okay. Okay, and again, this is a descendant selector, right? It looks for a class of project, and then it goes into that and looks for an LI, and then it goes into that and looks for an A. Let's just go take a look at that, where that's happening, right? So here's the div with the class of project, and it looks for an LI inside of it, and it has one, and then it finds the A. So all three of these links meet that condition, so that all underlines are removed from all of them. Okay. right, so we're in pretty good shape. Our last item, if we take a look, right, is we want to have a different color and then a little hover on our text. Right? So, and I'm leaving the size, you know, we could make the LIs a little, the items a little bit bigger, right? If we wanted to, we could. Oh, right, make them a little bit bigger and then say, oh, well, if we do that, just make those a little bit bigger, right? So, whatever we want to do. Okay. So next thing, we're going to modify, right, this, what happens when you roll over or hover over them, right? And there's a format or a little mnemonic device, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy it. I have it handy. And it's called the love-hate link format, right? Link, L-O, visited, hate for hover, and A for active, right? So, you know, it could use a little work on its mnemonics, but you get the point. It's a way to try to remember what the 4 different states are. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, and the link color, right, is whatever is the color we're looking at right now, right? Visited, once you've clicked on a link, you can have that be a different color. You might remember that we were looking at it previously. Let's go ahead and comment this stuff out for a second. Right? They're purple, right? And purple is the default visited link color. Right, if I go ahead and put those back, save that, we have our gray. Our hover color is going to be black, right? And then our active color, because there's link active on it, which is the color it is when you're hovering it. Okay, so let's just take a look. Right there, it's black. And when I click on it, right, it turns the gray. That's the active. So let's just go and set, right? So if I make, so they're all 5/5, so let's just go ahead. We'll do one by one. Make them red. Right. No impact, right, for the color, right, because it's the color of the text. So. Hex. So if they've all been visited, right, they could all be red, meaning that they were looked at. We could make the hover so we hover over them. So, right, what's happening is I hover and then I click, and when I click it turns red. So I think I'm going to leave that just for fun. Right? Okay. All right, and there we are. Right. So what have we worked on? We've gone ahead, added in our logo. We put a border on the box of our nav. We've aligned all of our content internally. We've done a little heading. We've done a little list. We've created some CSS styles. Right? So we're on our way. I wonder. I think that's enough for today. Right? Again, this is just a little warm up. Right? Just to get back in the swing of making a simple HTML file. Going forward, we're going to get much more detailed, flesh this out a little bit more, as well as work on your additional projects. Okay, so go ahead and put together your landing page and be ready to sort of show that next week. Okay, all right, we're all set.